Hey everybody, it's RJ, your host, and welcome to Hash It Out. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Kim Stuck of Allay Consulting about guiding cannabis companies through compliance pitfalls and the ever-changing state of cannabis regulations on the state and federal levels in the US. We'll also discuss the state of cannabis regulations in other nations, such as Canada and Mexico, the conflict in the US Congress regarding the SAFE Banking Act versus broader federal cannabis policy reform, and more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. My guest today is the founder and CEO of the cannabis compliance services company, Allay Consulting. Welcome to the show, Kim Stuck. Hello, how are you today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Doing good.
Right on, and thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to ask you about all you've got going on at Allay Consulting, and then of course talking about some of the wider trending cannabis topics happening in here in the US. But first and foremost, where are you joining us from today?
So I'm actually in Portland, Oregon. We have two different locations. So one in Denver, Colorado. I happen to be in Portland right now. So yeah, exciting.
Right on. Cool. I love Denver. My girlfriend's sister lives there, and we had just visited them recently. So love the Denver area. And I have never been up to Portland, so that's definitely on the bucket list for something.
It's great. Both places are equally as good. I'm originally from Denver. And we have 3 consultants that live out there, so I'm there all the time. But I happen to reside outside of Portland, so I work in the Portland office most of the time.
Cool. Right on. Love to see that. And how has the we're almost finished with 2021. I really cannot believe it's gone by in half of a blink of an eye, although I'm not certain how much I'll miss 2021. But how has it been for you so far?
I think that everyone's struggling in their own ways. It is a challenge. Most of our services that we offer, thankfully, can be do virtually now, which is really amazing. It actually saves our clients quite a bit of money when we don't have to fly to them all the time. And we originally offered it that way. Most of my consultants work from home, that kind of thing. And they did that, before COVID. So we were easily adapted. But there is something to say about having an audit on site and being, in front of people face to face. I've gone to a lot of conferences recently. I just spoke at MJ Biz and, the Cannabis Women's Conference and all these things. And I have literally had people come up to me and go, "You're Kim Stuck." And I said, "Yeah, hi." And they're like, "I've been your client for 2 years and I've never met you face to face." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, John," or, whoever.
Yeah.
And that's always so weird because we've been working so closely with them, but yet we've never actually seen each other face to face. So that's kind of a weird thing.
Interesting. You're bridging the digital divide. That's something.
Trying, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Now, for those who are watching and listening who may not be familiar with what y'all do over at Allay Consulting, I understand that y'all use your expertise from seed to sale to work to help companies navigate what you call compliance pitfalls in the cannabis industry, and then also to ensure best practices. So tell me more about when the company started, how you started the company, and then what specifically y'all specialize in.
Yeah, so I originally started in the industry in 2014, but I started as a regulator. So I was actually a cannabis regulator in Denver. And then after a few years of that, I kind of fell in love with the industry and the people. And I realized that there was a huge gap of understanding between compliance and, what they were actually doing in their facilities. So in 2017, I went out on my own and just decided to be a consultant for the industry instead of being, an enforcement officer, which was a huge, terrifying risk that everybody thought I was insane for doing because, you leave this cush government job with pension and benefits to go out on your own. That's always a little questionable. But it ended up being the best decision I ever made. I absolutely love what I do now. We got really busy really quick and have been around, and now we have a team of 5 and we work in all 50 states and a few different countries and things like that. So what we really focus on is obviously state compliance. Each state has their own set of regulations you have to follow, but that's actually the easiest set of regulations we work with. What we really, our bread and butter really is in manufacturing and cultivation. And that's essentially GMP certification, which is good manufacturing practices that are based on FDA regulations. So we help get in compliant with FDA regulations or get GMP certified. We help with a lot of that. We also do OSHA. Worker safety is very important, especially during COVID. We got a lot of like emergency calls of, hey, OSHA showed up. We were not compliant. We have $100,000 of fines. What do? We have 15 days to fix this. And so we come in and help them fix it and then get their fines down to like $10,000. We've been very, very fortunate in our services when it comes to that. So then we also do fire code, ISO certification, GAP certification, which is good agricultural practices in the cultivation facilities. And then we also help with like organic and kosher and those things that people just kind of want to add on if they want to. So anything to do with operations, anything to do with worker safety and consumer safety, that's where we lie.
I see. And you mentioned your government work just a moment ago. Now, when you were doing that, I understand that you became the nation's first cannabis and hemp specialist for a major metropolitan public health authority, being the city of Denver.
Yes.
Yeah.
So technically I had the first like cannabis specialist job title, but at the time it was the health department and there were 9 of us. And they kind of came to us and they were like, okay, cannabis needs to be regulated. They're making edibles and tinctures and vape pens. Like somebody's got to be looking at this. And Denver is very, very strict on their regulations when it comes to health and safety. Obviously, it's a major metropolitan area. If an outbreak happens, it's a lot of people that are sick. So we all kind of had to do it. But very quickly, going into all of these facilities, we realized that cannabis is very, very different than just any wholesale food manufacturer. The processes, the extraction, the chemicals, the contamination levels, the testing, the plant itself is very different. I mean, many of the FDA people that I've spoken to are like, yeah, we'll just put it under produce. And I'm like, you can't wash a cannabis plant before you process it. Like, They don't understand that yet. And so, there's just a lot of differences. And it got really, really busy because a lot of people were getting licenses. And so they kind of looked at me and said, hey, I just studied a lot and went into a lot of places and learned a lot about cannabis. And they were like, okay, do you want to take this on? And I was like, absolutely, get me out of restaurants, So yeah, and then so I took that on, and like I said, I was there for a little over 3 years. Honestly, the department and the team was amazing. I absolutely loved everybody that I worked with, but it was just obviously apparent. It was so apparent to me that I didn't belong there, and that I belonged helping people because it's really in my nature to help. And when I saw situations as a regulator, you can't give them advice. You can't give them the answer. You just state the regulation and they have to follow it, and that's it. That's all you do. So I kept seeing these people get these crazy amounts of fines. I was destroying millions of dollars worth of crops and products, and it was just too much. I was like, oh my gosh. And then my boss was like, well, you can't help them. You're not a consultant. And I said, well, where are the consultants? And she said, I don't think there are any. And I went, oh, okay, it's time, So it worked out really well.
Right. And now your team of 5, y'all swoop in like the Avengers now, like solving these compliance problems in sometimes a very short period of time, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it does happen. We try to be proactive and we try to talk our clients into, doing things early. That's part of our entire thing. Get us in there, even if it's a small contract on retainer, at least you're taking steps in the right direction instead of waiting for something terrible to happen. And then we have to come in and cram a lot of work into, even sometimes like a couple weeks. And sometimes, and most of the time, we're on a wait list for our services. So a lot of times people will reach out to us and we are like, sorry, we can't help you. You're going to have to find someone else that can do it because there's only so much time and bandwidth that we have. So we really try to help people get compliant early so that when people start coming in, they're ready for it and don't have to worry about it. That's why we do so much with GMP and FDA, because eventually it's going to be federally legal. And in CBD's case, it technically already is, and the FDA could start regulating tomorrow. So we're really trying to get into a lot of hemp facilities and get them to where they understand what they need to be doing.
Now, working in a space where regulations vary so much based on the state level, the city level, and even the local level, without federal legalization, at least as of now, like you said, eventually it will happen, and hopefully sooner rather than later. But what is it like to work in such a shifting space, and more specifically, what are the most common, as you call, compliance pitfalls that you see companies falling into? And then since the years of legalization sweeping the nation, how have those needs sort of changed?
So I think that the list of pitfalls is always hard because every year it's something different. Every year we kind of run into something comes out, D8 or D10, there's always like weird things that are constantly happening. Keeping in line with the regulations, reaching out to your regulators, understanding when changes are coming is all very important. But honestly, for most of our clients, that's what we do for them, right? We keep track of that stuff, and we can reach out to local jurisdictions, state jurisdictions, and then eventually federal jurisdictions to find out exactly what they need and that kind of thing. When it comes to like FDA stuff, with food safety and consumer health, food safety is food safety is food safety. If there's risk in a facility, taking care of that risk as soon as possible is the best way to do it. And so that's, since the FDA will not go into facilities, I mean, we have clients who are, CBD right now, technically that's under FDA jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. We have called them and been like, will you send someone just to do an audit so that they know what to do? And they straight up turn us down. These are very proactive people. They want to be, in line with FDA regulations because they feel like just because they're not coming in and seeing them, they should still know what's going on. And so instead of that, the next best thing is going to a third party accredited certifying body and getting GMP certification, which are in line with FDA food codes. So that's kind of what I've been telling people to do and what a lot of people have decided to do. With the federal legalization that you were just talking about, I think it's going to be kind of treated, I don't think there's going to be a handoff. I don't think local governments are going to say, okay, now the FDA is regulating you. That is not going to be the case. States are all very different. Their cultures are very different and they require different regulations, much like alcohol, right? That's a perfect example. The federal government is very, involved in alcohol if there's a major issue, but mostly it's up to the states on how they're going to regulate it. Because there are some states that just may never want cannabis in their state. And I don't think the federal government is going to dictate that. Although decriminalizing at a federal level and releasing, prisoners who are, in conviction of cannabis, cannabis trials and convictions, they should, that would be excellent. And then the Safe Banking Act would also be excellent because then we could actually function as a real business. I can't even tell you how hard it is. I mean, I'm an ancillary company. I've been kicked out of 3 banks. It's very, very hard to run a business when you don't have banking, to pay your people out of. And when you have cash in your facilities, these poor dispensaries with cash to the ceiling because they have nowhere to put it, that's what's happening in Denver right now. There's a lot of robberies. There's a lot of, people getting hurt. And that needs to end. That's not good. And also, it's easier to track what cannabis businesses are doing when you can see where their money is. People are like, oh, people are selling out the back door. Well, how are you going to know if you won't let us have banking? So
right. It's like it seems like they notice the problem, but they're not interested in the solution, at least as of yet. There needs to be like further deliberation. Although it seems, I don't know, it seems obvious to me, but I'm not in Capitol Hill, so I don't know the intricacies of everything. I'm curious because you mentioned that Allay sort of works not only in all 50 states, but also in our neighboring nations, so like Canada and Mexico. So I'm just curious because I don't get to speak to people that work in other nations or are even aware of the cannabis policy movements in other nations. Based on what you've seen so far, what are some of the differences that are distinctive in our neighboring nations, and then what are sort of the similarities that tie us all together?
Well, most of them are very, very different. But the things that we're offering them are the same things that we're offering them in the States. So like when we work in Canada, it's usually because Canada wants to set themselves up. Those Canadian businesses want to set themselves up to be able to sell out of country eventually. Their entire country is legalized. So that is a huge possibility. In fact, that was really, really smart of the Canadian government. Also, getting ISO 22000, which is one of the certifications we can help with, is the certification that most countries require to when you're selling out of country. So we even in the States have clients that are like, we want to sell out of country the minute that we're allowed to. How do we get to that? Well, you get ISO 22000 right now. And you're used to running at that, and you can show regulators and people like, hey, we can do this. Mexico right now is a little different. They're not quite far along, and the Canadian government is Canada Health. Or Health Canada. They are very, very strict about regulations when it comes to health and safety. So they're a level up from the United States by far. And it's their entire country. So the set of regulations that they're using is throughout the entire country, which makes it so much easier to function than the way that the United States is doing it. Right. Mexico is still kind of figuring it out. And so they're kind of just figuring out what they need. They're just working on compliance with their local governments, right? And understanding how to get a license and how to set themselves up and their facilities up, right? Because they just kind of got going. And then, we've even had clients in Israel. We've had clients in South Africa. And really, like I said, we're doing the same thing that we're doing. Usually it's like GMP certification or ISO certification, because that's going to be the trend. Even in wholesale food manufacturing, you have to have some of those certifications in order to just sell anything, flour or sugar or anything. So that is going to be what's going to happen to everybody eventually.
I see. And you also mentioned, coming back here to the States, you also mentioned the importance of the Safe Banking Act. It's such a key piece of legislation that would make the lives of so many business owners, ancillary companies, dispensary operators. It would make their lives so much easier. First of all, I was surprised to hear that y'all have been running into problems finding financial services as an ancillary company. I guess I wasn't aware that it was that scrutinous in terms of finding banking. Yeah, so any ancillary company, most of the ones that I've worked with have had issues. And it's because we support the cannabis industry. And it's written, even in the PPE loans for COVID and all of that, I couldn't apply for those loans. We were fine, thankfully. But I couldn't apply for those loans because I support the cannabis industry, which also means that any plumber or electrician or lawyer or technically weren't allowed to be a part of that because it was a federal program. And so finally obviously we found bank that will take us, and they're local and it's great, but they're expensive, and that's just the way it is right now. It's expensive to operate in the cannabis space because nobody, still to this day people don't want to work with us, which is absolutely ridiculous, but it still happens all the time. So we've definitely run into issues, and so has most ancillary businesses that I know of, honestly. Right. And it seems as if the Safe Banking Act would really solve a lot of those problems. However, on Capitol Hill, there seems to be a sort of conflict of interest, even within the Democratic Party itself, regarding how exactly to implement these federal cannabis policy reforms in this country. In July, Senators Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Ron Wyden introduced, of course, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which seeks to legalize and regulate cannabis at the federal level and transfer regulation of cannabis from the Drug Enforcement Agency to the Food and Drug Administration, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, giving the agencies similar regulatory and enforcement authority as they currently do over tobacco and alcohol. Meanwhile, there are several senators calling for the passage of the Safe Banking Act first, just to allow banks to service state legal cannabis companies. Several senators, notably Senator Booker, have expressed opposition to that reform, fearing that it would jeopardize their broader bill if the Safe Banking Act is passed first. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, and then also what are you hearing from the companies that you offer services to? What are their thoughts on all of that?
So I think, including myself, most people want the Safe Banking Act to be passed. The sooner that that's passed, and it is far more likely to get passed than the grander bill. And I understand, what Schumer is saying, but I actually don't think that that's true. There are a lot of things in the broader bill that don't really have much to do with cannabis. And right now they're kind of hashing that out and figuring out, what, social equity stuff. And, there's a lot of different layers to that broader bill where the Safe Banking Act does have some of that. I think every bill does, but it's a lot more specific about what we can do as companies. We'll be able to have banking. It might actually get rid of us dealing with 280E, which means, we can't write anything off in our businesses. Like normal cannabis business or normal businesses can, and cannabis businesses can't. And that's a huge expense. And I think that a lot of people in the United States think that if you own a cannabis company, you're just rolling in money. You're making money hand over fist. And it's not actually true at all. In fact, most of them are, operating at a loss at this point because they're paying so much in taxes. And then on top of that, they can't write anything off. And it's crazy. And so a lot of cannabis businesses are going under. They're really, really struggling to stay alive. And something like that getting signed will completely change their lives if it goes the way that we want it to go. It's going to be really interesting. And then maybe bank accounts won't cost so much either. A lot of these bank accounts are very, very expensive because it takes so much more work from the banker themselves, because they have to, every time there's a transaction, they have to do a paperwork and send it to, the EDA or DEA or whatever it is. And it's hard on the banks too. So if something like this gets passed, and I'm really hoping that safe banking actually does get passed before the grander bill, the federal legalization gets passed, because it'll happen eventually. I'm not super rushed for federal legalization because there's already so many moving parts in cannabis that's just going to add another moving part. And government agencies don't tend to communicate very well. So I think it could be very hard on companies if it happens, say, tomorrow.
Yeah. You got that right. Yeah, that last bit was certainly true there. I'm curious then, we are then almost to the end of 2021, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Really cannot believe it, but not going to miss it too much, just as much as I missed 2020, I guess. But what are y'all over at Allay Consulting then looking forward to close out the year? And then what are y'all keeping your eye on for the next coming years in terms of what you're seeing with compliance trends or pieces of legislation or policy reforms that y'all are keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much going on. Obviously, like New York is writing their regulations, and a lot of the East Coast is finally opening up. So we're doing a lot of work in Michigan and New Jersey and New York, and things like Connecticut, Virginia, obviously. So there's a lot going on. I think we're really still pushing for, hey, get GMP certification because it's going to really help you in the future, help you get your license or, whatever, help you mitigate risk in your company. But one of the biggest things that we did this year was open the psilocybin division of our entire firm, because that's why we came out to Oregon. Not that we didn't have clients out here anyway, it kind of worked out. But that is really starting to roll forward in Oregon. The therapeutic use is now legalized out here. And so we're also keeping an eye on that. Cannabis is great, but I think all plant medicines have their place in this world. And I think that a lot more research is getting done on cannabis, and all these different cannabinoids are kind of coming out of the works, and who knows what's going to happen and what they're going to learn about it. So I'm really keeping an eye on like the science side of everything, and just trying to help the good companies hang in there through all of this, and hopefully through federal legalization, and be able to thrive and be amazing and live the American dream just like everyone else gets to.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your perspective and all that you've got going on over at Allay Consulting. And then, of course, your perspective into some of the greater discussions happening here in the U.S. and across the world. We will certainly be keeping an eye on all that y'all have got going on over at Allay Consulting. Please keep up the good work. Please keep promoting the plant medicine out there, getting the good medicine out to the people. And I appreciate your time, Kim. Thank you so much. Please continue to be well and stay safe out there.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, no problem. Kim Stuck, everybody. That is it for Hash It Out, y'all. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I am your host, RJ Balde, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace out. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out our channel. Click here to watch another episode of Hash It Out. To find more cannabis industry reporting, insider stories, and to stay up to date on the latest trends, make sure to subscribe and keep up with our TRICHOMES community app. Download it now for free, and we'll see you there.